Alright, so today we're going to talk about 9.4 solving quadratic equations using square roots. So this is week 5 for continuous learning. So first thing let's review is how many solutions can a quadratic equation have? So we looked at this in 9.1 when we looked at the graphs. So our first graph we could have would be like a parabola that touches just like maybe on the x-axis. Okay, so that would be an example of one solution. We could have a parabola that maybe goes through the x-axis twice, and that would give us two solutions. And then we could have a parabola that maybe is shifted up on our y-axis and never crosses the x-axis, resulting in 0 solutions. Okay, so those are the 3 ways we can look at this. So one of the things we're going to talk about is what happens to a number when we take the square root of it. So if we look at a, we have x squared equals 49. So to get rid of the square, we're going to square root both sides. And so on the left-hand side, we'll be left with x equals, and when we take the square root of 49, we get 7. But think about what happens when you square a number. Okay, so if we do 7 squared, we get 49. We know that. But what if we did negative 7 squared? Remember, a negative times a negative is a positive, so we would also get 49. So when we do this, we're going to put a plus or minus in front to show that we're going to have 2 answers. And you'll do that on every problem. Okay, looking at B, x squared equals negative 16. We're going to square root both sides. The square root of x squared is x, and the square root of negative 16, we can't take the square root of a negative number, so if we were to try this in the calculator, we're going to get error, so that means we have no solution here. Okay, so that would give you a graph that looks something like that. Alright, and then x squared equals 0. So again, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So x equals, we have plus or minus, and the square root of 0 is 0. But do we really need plus or minus 0? No. So we could just say x equals 0. Alright, so let's move on to our next examples. So what if we have a number in front? So if we look at A, we have 7x squared equals 112. The first thing we want to do is we want to isolate that x squared. So we're going to divide both sides by 7. So if we take 112 divided by 7, we get 16. And now we want to get rid of that squared, so we're going to square root both sides. So we have x equals, and then the plus or minus is going to go in front, and the square root of 16 is 4. Alright, looking at B, negative 3x squared equals negative 24. Get the x squared by itself. Here we're going to divide by negative 3. And so x squared equals negative 24 divided by negative 3 is going to give us a positive 8. And then we're going to square root both sides. So x equals plus or minus. Okay, so the square root of 8, if we plug that in our calculator, we get a decimal. We want to leave these in simplified radical form. So this is where last week's lesson is going to come into play. So we can take 8 and we can split it apart to be the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. And the square root of 4 is 2. And we don't know the square root of 2. So x equals plus or minus 2 square root of 2. Alright, in C, we have negative 1/2 x squared equals negative 36. So you can either divide by this fraction. I'm going to multiply by the reciprocal, which would be negative 2 over 1, or just negative 2. Okay, so these are going to cancel, and we're left with x squared equals. So negative 36 times negative 2 equals 72. And if we take the square root of both sides, we get x equals plus or minus. Now the square root of 72, there's lots of ways we can break 72 into a product of a perfect square, but if we want to pick the largest perfect square, that would be 36, and that would be multiplied by 2. Alright, and the square root of 36 is 6, so our solution would be plus or minus 6 square root of 2. And the last section. So again, we're getting rid of everything that's with the x squared to isolate it, just like you would if you were solving an equation for x. So we have 3x squared minus 5 equals 22. We're going to start off with adding 5 to both sides. So we have 3x squared equals 27. We need to divide both sides by 3. So x squared equals 9. And if we take the square root, we get x equals plus or minus, and the square root of 9 is 3. Alright, and looking at b, we have negative 5x squared plus 19 equals 144. If we subtract 19 from both sides, we get, I want to say 125, but let me check real quick. Yep, 125. So we have negative 5x squared equals 125. Divide both sides by negative 5. So x squared equals negative 25. Square root both sides. So x equals plus or minus, oh, we have a square root of a negative, so that does not exist. So we're going to have no solution. And looking at c, we have 3x squared plus 17 equals 209. So we're going to start off with subtracting the 17. That gives us 3x squared equals 192. And then we're going to divide by 3. So x squared equals 64. Square root both sides. So x equals plus or minus, and the square root of 64 is 8.